Welcome to Philosophy of Action. Today I want to continue the discussion on failing, or perhaps more accurately, limiting cultural assumptions. Specifically, I want to talk about what I believe has gone wrong in the modern West. In a previous episode, depending on how I end up organizing these recordings, I argued that our current crisis surrounding birth rates, pensions, and demographic sustainability is not just a result of some grand elite conspiracy. It's not primarily about cheap labor. It's not fundamentally about replacing Europeans. Rather, it's the unintended outcome of different groups pursuing aligned short-term interests without accounting for the long-term consequences of the policies they support. Group alignment on policy implemented, outcomes produced, outcomes not actually desired by any of them. Effectively, everyone is working towards an end they do not actually desire because they are not thinking about the long-term consequences of the whole policy mix put together. Why? Because crucial aspects of reality were not taken into account. In the case of mass immigration, one false assumption was that people are interchangeable units, that human beings can simply be relocated across radically different cultural, economics, and institutional environments without systemic friction or transformation. That assumption was false. In case of birth rates, another assumption was that you could indefinitely adjust social incentives, economic pressures, and cultural norms without affecting long-term demographic output. That altering the structure of existence would not alter reproduction. The assumption was also false. You effectively change the calculation for having kids and hope that the actual having of kids does not get changed, or rather, you don't think about it. And regarding mass immigration, another simple fact is if you take people out of the area environment that they are used to or that they have developed towards or their culture is based around and put them in a new area, their culture will simply not interact well with the new material reality of their biosphere. The modern blind spot, I would say, the biggest one that we can see across left and right, is effectively that both sides are ignoring the missing half of the other. Today the error is even clearer. The political right and the political left are each attempting to solve what they consider to be existential problems, but each side ignores a crucial part of the very puzzle it claims to prioritize. They identify real problems, but they refuse to integrate the other half of the equation, and because of the partisan entrenchment, the logic becomes your position is wrong because it's yours, my position is right because it's mine. Not because it's coherent, not because it solves the whole problem, but because it is tribal. Now I'd like to outline this difference between climate change and mass immigration. One of the most consistent modern left-wing priorities is climate change and sustainability. The left may have shifted emphasis over time from wage equality to identity issues to institutional reform, but climate change remains a central, consistent concern. It is framed as a long-term civilizational threat to all of us. And yet, the left today either ignores or tacitly supports mass immigration. It may no longer headline it aggressively, but it rarely challenges it meaningfully. At the same time, many on the right either downplay climate change, postpone it, or relativize it, or deny it even outright. So we already see the symmetry. The left ignores mass immigration and the right ignores climate change. Each side dismisses what the other side considers existential. The geopolitical irony is clear here as well. Many on the right treat Russia as a friend or neutral, which is interesting because they ignore their transgressions, which are causing the very problem that the right considers to be a big issue: mass immigration. Russia and America, which are generally nations supported by the right wing, either alternative right for Russia or more mainstream right for America, but America and Russia have both been major players, if not drivers, in mass immigration in the form of asylum seekers from Syria and Ukraine by starting wars in the Middle East in case of America and by starting a war with Ukraine in the case of Russia, and of course prolonging the war in Syria by supporting it by both sides. And this means that the very nations that the right wing supports are causing the very problem the right wing wants to stop. Meanwhile, the left ignores or downplays the Chinese transgressions, and to a lesser extent India and the developing world. Specifically, these nations are significant, if not the largest polluters in the world, and yet they are sometimes portrayed as these nations that can do no wrong or aren't a problem, or we should be working with them, and to a certain extent that's true. But even, like, let's say, the elimination of the Uyghur people is being ignored by the left, despite the fact that China is effectively one of the main drivers of things that the left should hate. But this is where the irony therefore deepens. Meanwhile, many on the left ignore or downplay Chinese transgressions. China, India, and the broader developing world are treated as moral counterweights to the West. But here's where the irony deepens. China is one of the largest polluters in the world. India is rapidly industrializing. Many developing nations are increasing their carbon output in pursuit of growth. These are precisely the actors whose emissions significantly shape global climate outcomes. And yet the left often downplays, criticizes these nations. Now we reach the central contradiction. If climate change is the left's highest priority, then mass immigration must be analyzed in climate terms. Migrants moving from low consumption regions to high consumption regions often increases their carbon footprint significantly. If individuals relocate from low carbon economies to high carbon economies, their per capita emissions typically rise. This does not mean migrants are morally blameworthy. It means systemic effects must be considered. If Europe has not yet reduced its per capita emissions to extremely low levels, then importing large populations into high consumption societies may increase total emissions, not reduce them. Additionally, development aid without environmental conditions can increase and will increase emissions. Global production shifts to nations with looser standards, which also increases emissions, and major polluters like China and India remain central climate change variables. Thus, the left simultaneously prioritizes climate change, supports or ignores mass immigration, and downplays criticism of major polluters. This creates a structural contradiction. Meanwhile, the right, as I've hinted at earlier, already has its own contradiction. If mass immigration is the highest priority on the right, then climate change must be analyzed in migration terms. Climate instability increases, resource scarcity, agricultural failure increase, political instability increases, and migration pressures go up. If you ignore climate change, you ignore major drivers for future migration. Furthermore, cutting development aid without strategy may worsen the instability. Ignoring Russian aggression contributes to refugee flows, and climate change itself may generate mass migration waves that geopolitical actors, including Russia, could weaponize. Thus, the right simultaneously prioritizes stopping mass immigration, downplays climate change, and minimizes foreign destabilizing factors that produce migration. This is equally contradictory. The core diagnosis, therefore, is that both sides operate from limited assumptions. The left assumes mass immigration is not a major structural problem. The right assumes climate change is not a major structural problem. Both assumptions are flawed because of the entrenched partisan identity over the last 20 to 30 years. Neither side is willing to integrate the other's concern. The result is paralysis, and leading to both problems getting worse and reinforcing each other. So what we need is a non-policy possibility. If climate change is truly existential, and if mass immigration is truly destabilizing, then these are not mutually exclusive priorities. They are structurally connected. A coherent policy framework would include serious climate mitigation, controlled and strategically limit immigration, conditional development aid, stronger border management, strategic geopolitical realism towards Russia, China and other powers, and recognition that foreign actors do not prioritize Europe's interest. Such a framework would not be left or right, it would be systemic and coherent. What has gone wrong is not simply policy. It is the cultural assumptions that underlie that policy. Each side assumes that the other is morally defective rather than partially correct. Each side assumes that conceding one point means surrendering identity. This is unsustainable. So what's the solution? Not replacing the system, not revolution, not abolishing parties. Instead, I propose a parallel civic infrastructure. Every city, region and province should have physical, non-partisan debate houses. Spaces where public policy is discussed, philosophy is debated, theology is debated, social structures are examined and people meet face to face. Not party branches, not online outrage machines, not cancellation arenas, but structured forums with initial discussion circles, for example Socratic style dialogues, clarifying what is actually being debated, then a structural debate, and an open networking afterwards with people who want to organize around these conclusions of the debates. These forums themselves would not be political organizations, they would be civic marketplaces of ideas. Why? Because online interaction is too anonymous, too abstract, too indirect. Trust-based organizations are extremely difficult to build without a physical presence. We've seen this over the last 20 years. Face-to-face interactions will restore accountability, nuance and complexity. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would allow us to finally integrate the missing half of every political problem. That is what I believe has gone wrong, and what I believe could begin to start fixing it.